On this special episode of College Press Box, Texas football chase for the championship, we break down 9th-ranked Texas football season to this point, featuring breakdowns of the offense, the defense, our first half superlatives, and a college football playoff prediction. All this and more on this week's episode of College Press Box.
Good evening and welcome to this week's special episode of College Press Box, Texas football chase for the championship. I'm Campbell Choate and he's Jason Kinander. We've got a great show for you today, so let's dive right into it. Today's show is brought to you by Cap Metro, Austin's transit system. We connect you to work, school, play, and everywhere in between. Plan your ride to this weekend's game at capmetro.com.
So before we really get started, let me give a quick rundown of how today's show is going to be structured. We're going to break down all things Texas football from the first half of the season. Zach Davis is going to join us in a minute to talk about the offense, with Justin Goosman following suit talking about the defense. Then we'll have Joe Duffey come on to give his first half Texas football superlatives. And finally, Tyler Moss will wrap things up with his Big 12 second half preview and college football playoff prediction. Now joining me to break down the offensive unit for the Texas football team is the aforementioned Zach Davis. How's it going, Zach?
It's going great, Jason.
Great to see you. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about here is that Texas is averaging 35 points per game thus far this season, which ranks 4th in the Big 12. Do you expect the Horns to keep this up, and if so, how?
For the most part, yes, absolutely, I do. First of all, their strength of schedule ranks 3rd easiest in all of FBS for the remainder of the season. Teams like Houston, BYU, and Texas Tech all give up, on average, over 25 points per game. With the Longhorns being a top 15 offense in all of Division I football, I would be surprised if they struggled to score against those schools. Iowa State ranks 3rd in defense in the Big 12, only allowing 20 points per game. So Texas might struggle against the Cyclones. But besides that, I would be surprised if Texas was held under 30 points for the remainder of the season. One part of the offense that has been exceptional and surpassed my expectations is the run game. Jonathan Brooks has already gotten to the 700-yard mark on rushing yards, and C.J. Baxter brings support whenever needed, averaging 4 yards per carry. I think a lot of Texas fans expected the air attack to be the focus, with Bijan departing for the NFL and Quinn coming into a prove-it season, but Brooks and Baxter have brought solid support to the offense. Texas has to find their stride heading into the second half of their season. Losing is okay if it happens once, Jason, but once you lose again, your season is over. I believe this whole Texas is a second half team thing is going to fade out for the remainder of the year, as this team has everything to gain and at the same time everything to lose. The Longhorns restart their college football playoff campaign against one of the weakest teams in the Big 12 against Houston on Saturday. Expect them to come out early and put them away quickly, with Houston giving up the most points in the entire conference. This is a big prove-it game for Sark's offense. If this game is close or Texas struggles to score, I think the expectations of Texas football fans are going to have to change.
Two things I really agree with you there on, Zach. One, that if that game is close on Saturday, that the expectations will have to change. And two, that the two-headed monster of Brooks and Baxter has been a huge combination for Texas football this year. Anyway, moving on. In the past couple of weeks, Texas has struggled in the red zone, for example. Texas only put up 3 points inside the 20 at the Red River Showdown. What's the problem and what's the fix, Zach?
Yeah, it's not just the Red River Showdown, actually. They struggled against Kansas, too. Sark's offense is excellent when there is field to run, but recently he has failed to coach his team for red zone scores. He runs misdirection and run-pass options better than anybody I know. It creates a lot of space and allows for Texas's guys to run out into space. They have marched down the field with ease so far, but when that field runs out and space is limited, they struggle to score. Like you said, they only scored 3 points in the red zone last week to Oklahoma's 34. If Texas has any aspirations to win the Big 12, they're going to have to look to be more versatile and creative in the red zone. Power runs and slant routes are just not enough to get the 6. On top of that, the offensive line has to do a better job at helping Ewers extend plays. For the first time in a long time, Texas returned every starter on the offensive line, but the hype has not lived up to it. The O-line unit has already given up 11 sacks thus far, just 3 short of last year's number. You have to give your quarterback time, especially in the red zone, to extend plays and finish the drive. Finally, if anyone wants to be successful on offense, especially in the red zone, you have to find the mismatch. Jatavion Sanders needs to get the ball more. There's a reason he came into the season as a first-round talent. With his 6'4" frame, weighing over 240 pounds, he is one of the most unguardable players in college football. One of Texas's biggest failures so far this season is struggling to get him the ball. He only has 1 touchdown on the year and only caught 1 pass for 13 yards against Oklahoma. I want to see him lining up in the middle of the field and attacking the linebackers that have to guard him. He is taller, more versatile, faster, and more athletic than almost every linebacker in college football. If Texas brings more versatility to their red zone play calling, improve their blocking, and get Sanders more involved, the red zone struggles the Longhorns have had will fade away, and scoring inside that 20-yard mark will become much easier for Texas football.
You know, Zach, I think that Oklahoma game would have been a lot different if Sanders was fully healthy, more involved. Like you said, he's a matchup nightmare for those linebackers on just about any team in the country. First-round talent indeed. Let's move over to quarterback now. Quinn Ewers is playing his first season where he has draft eligibility following the year. Came into his tenure at Texas as one of the top-ranked recruits in school history, so you can argue that he hasn't actually lived up to that hype. Do you expect him to prove that argument wrong in the remainder of these games? And if you can see him declaring for the draft, Zach, tell me where you think he'll get picked.
Well, for a Texas offense, first of all, I think Quinn's been just fine. He has over 1,700 passing yards for 11 touchdowns on just 3 interceptions so far this season. His passer rating sits at 163, which is a 30-point improvement to his 132 passer rating last year. I don't think there were very many athletes who had more pressure than Ewers going into the season, and so far I think he has thrived. His offense has not scored less than 30 points, and outside of Wyoming, he has put up over 300 passing yards per game. I think it's almost impossible to live up to that kind of hype unless you are the Heisman favorite. His season numbers have been great, and you could tell he wants to win more than anything. He shaved off the mullet, in my opinion, to show some signs of maturity, as he is looking to make the college football playoff above all else. When you come to Texas, you are looking to win. If Texas wins out and makes the CFP and shows the world he can win games above all else, there's no reason why he shouldn't be a first-round pick in my opinion. His arm talent and general awareness of the game make him an exceptional prospect, and now that he has shown he can get out of the pocket and make big runs when a play is dead, I would be surprised if Ewers went anywhere outside the first round.
Completely agree with that, Zach. And on top of Ewers, I think that we could see Quinn, Jatavian Sanders, Xavier Worthy, and A.D. Mitchell all be first-round picks on that Texas offense. Pretty hard to live up to the expectations when you have that many premier guys on one unit. Anyway, Zach Davis, great having you join us. When we return, Justin Goosman will join Campbell at the desk to talk a little defense. Stay with us. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to College Press Box. Now joining me to talk the other side of the ball is Justin Goosman. Great to have you on, Justin.
Always great to be here. Glad we get to talk about the other 11 that make up this Texas football team.
Yep. So early in the season, it felt like the Texas Longhorn defense was a strong suit of this football team. What was Texas defense doing well in the first 5 games, and what do they need to get back on coming out of the bye?
Yeah, well, Texas's defense was one of the best in the country early on this season. In the first 5 games of the season, the defense held opponents to performances of 10 points, 10 points, 6 points, 14 points, and then 24 points to Alabama, which is expected. All of that, of course, happening before Texas gave up 34 in a loss to Oklahoma, but the defense really was the more explosive unit on this team throughout the first 5 games. It wasn't always lockdown, but it was the ability to make timely plays, take risks, and turn over the opponent that made this defense so elite. Texas created multiple turnovers in the first 5 games of the season. Secondary forced 6 interceptions in just the first 5 games and became a true no-fly zone. There was one instance versus Rice where they forced interceptions on back-to-back drives, and I believe it was back-to-back throws against JT Daniels, completely flipping the momentum of the game, kickstarting the offense, and getting Texas ready to go for the rest of the game. The defense didn't force a single turnover against Oklahoma, which isn't necessarily indicative of a bad performance, but if they can get back to turning the opponent over, communicating in the secondary, this offense will have more opportunities to put points on the board. Coach Steve Sarkisian talked about this in his press conference earlier this morning, that this team is more than capable of taking the ball away multiple times in a game. Another thing that Texas was doing really, really well at the beginning of this season was taking away the number 1 strength of an offense. Against Alabama, the defense took away Jalen Milroe's ability to run the football and forced him to throw it early on. This opened up the playmakers in the secondary, got the pass rush involved late in the game. And against Wyoming, after the initial run from Harrison Whaley, the Texas defense really took that away. And it was eventually the biggest reason Texas was able to pull away. Texas will go against a quarterback familiar with the Horns next week in Donovan Smith, and it will be crucial that the Horns contain him in the pocket, especially in the red zone.
Now, what did you see defensively that Texas struggled with in their game against Oklahoma?
Well, Campbell, honestly, I felt that Texas's defense did a pretty good job in this one. Obviously, they gave up 34 points, but it didn't feel like the defense was the reason this team lost. It's easy to throw the blame on the defense for the way the game ended, but they held their ground even with the offense giving it away 3 times. That being said, there are 3 areas where Texas really struggled. 1, containing the QB. 2, communicating in the secondary. And 3, tackling the ball carrier. Giving up 113 yards on 13 carries to a quarterback that's not exactly known as a runner is not a great look. Texas was taking poor angles on the edge, allowing him to step up and break the pocket all too often. If Texas is going to return to form as a contender, they're going to need to figure out how to stop opposing quarterbacks from running with the football and escaping out of the pocket. Top quarterbacks like J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, Caleb Williams, Carson Beck, and Jordan Travis have all shown that they are more than capable runners. Texas needs to make sure that they fix that moving forward. The second big issue for Texas was communication in the secondary, and this really reared its ugly head on the final play of the game. Texas brought the house and put the Texas secondary in a position where they had to make a choice between covering the flat or following the receiver deep into the end zone, but neither defender communicated that, and they lost Anderson in the back of the end zone for a score. Although they did much better of a job in the second half overall, that's such a crucial play that the defense could have avoided had they just communicated who's taking which man. Finally, the issue of tackling. It's easier to sit up here and gripe about tackling, but there were a few plays against Oklahoma where it felt like the defense just couldn't bring down their man in open space. This was another area that Coach Sark addressed this morning in his press conference, noting that tackling has to improve. If the defense can just get back to the fundamentals, take the proper angle, and put themselves in a better position to make a play, good things will really start to happen for such a talented defense.
I love that you mentioned getting back to the fundamentals. Do you expect the defense to return to form for the second half of the season and give Texas a chance at the Big 12 championship?
Well, Campbell, I just talked about the talent on this Texas defense, and honestly, I really do. They're going to get Ryan Watts back, and the secondary is going to return to form. The remainder of the schedule looks very favorable to Texas to make a trip to Dallas for the Big 12 championship. If the secondary gets back to playing elite football, that opens up the pass rush, frees up the interior D-line, and gives Texas a much better chance to win games. The game against Oklahoma was by far this unit's worst performance, and they were definitely not the only reason why Texas lost this game. The defense shut the Sooners' offense down for much of the second half, barring that final drive, and had to deal with a few really short fields following turnovers by the offense. I expect Pete Kwiatkowski to have the issues cleaned up following the bye week, and it's going to be interesting to see what wrinkles this defense brings against Houston on Saturday. Only 6 games into the season, this defense hasn't reached its full potential, but even after one hiccup, they're well on their way to being a top defense in all of college football. The bye week couldn't have come at a better time, and Texas fans should expect a very dominant return to play this Saturday.
Thanks for that great analysis, Justin. When we return, Joe Duffey will share his first half superlatives. You really won't want to miss it. We'll be right back.
Welcome back into College Press Box. Check out who's joining us. Joe Duffey joining us for a segment that I am super excited about. Joe, take it away.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Jason. As we all know, we finally passed the first half of this highly anticipated college football season. The Texas Longhorns, as of Sunday afternoon, moved up to number 8 on the AP poll. Of course, this came on Texas's bye week after an upset loss in the Red River Showdown in Dallas. But even after a recent loss, there are very impressive players to highlight this season. First, I'll start with the best offensive player of the first half. For me, it's going to be none other than the QB1, Quinn Ewers. I know Texas is coming off a frustrating loss in Dallas, but it is clear that Quinn Ewers has taken a leap for this Texas squad. Through 6 games, Ewers has 1,704 passing yards. That's good for second in the Big 12 as of now, and has improved his passer rating to 163.8 this year. Speaking of efficiency, Ewers' completion percentage has improved from 58.1 last season to 69.6 through these 6 games. The best performance from Ewers was his game that he sheriffed the Longhorns through Tuscaloosa to stun the Alabama Crimson Tide. Ewers was the best player in that primetime interconference matchup, completing 24 of his 38 passes for 349 yards, 3 touchdowns, and more importantly, 0 picks. However, we can't overlook Ewers' work even on the ground, as said earlier. Quinn, who is not known for his speed, has been a weapon in the red zone for this Texas squad, which has struggled to cash in touchdowns from close distance. Granted, you could say it's because people aren't expecting Sarkisian to use him in that territory. But last year, Quinn Ewers finished with negative 52 rushing yards and 1 touchdown on the ground in 10 total games. So far, through 6 games, Ewers has 60 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. Ewers, to me, is starting to live up to his hype this season, and I expect him to be even better in the second half. Now, moving on to the most surprising player for the Longhorns, this should not be a surprise to any Texas football fan right now, but it's got to be Jonathan Brooks. If you go back to last season, most Texas fans were bidding Bijan Robinson farewell and dwelling on what a loss he'd be for this Longhorn rushing attack. Some were so focused on the 5-star freshman Cedric Baxter that they didn't even realize what they already had with the already experienced third-year Brooks. You see, for those who remember, Brooks was initially behind Baxter on the depth chart. However, through 6 games, Brooks has emerged as the RB1, averaging 121 yards rushing per game, first in the Big 12. He has a total of 726 yards rushing and 7 total touchdowns, 6 rushing, 1 receiving. Since the Wyoming game, Brooks has carried the bulk of the load with the Texas run game. His most dominant performance came at DKR against Kansas, where he rushed for 218 yards on 21 attempts with a couple of TDs on the ground. Yes, that is a remarkable 10.4 yards per carry. Behind this great offensive line, Jonathan Brooks is hopeful to continue his current 4-game streak of 100 yards on the ground, but maybe this time it won't be a surprise at this point for many fans. And then finally, I just have to speak about the best defensive player so far on the Texas defense. I know he's not coming off his best game so far, as this defensive unit struggled as a whole against Oklahoma's Dillon Gabriel. However, I say the best defensive player for the Longhorn defense has been their leader, senior linebacker Jalen Ford. Through 6 contests, Ford has 40 total tackles and 5 TFLs. The coverage linebacker also has 2 interceptions to go along with it. Ford is aiming to improve his draft stock after arguably being snubbed in the Big 12 DPOI race last season and not having the ideal start to his senior year. Nevertheless, Jalen Ford's play has jumped off the page for me thus far for this Texas defense that has quite the job to do if Texas wants to play in Jerry World come December. So in conclusion, this first half of Texas football has flown by, and I cannot wait to see what Texas does this as they try to rewrite their story in the second half compared to differently last year as we head to a close in these final months.
You know, Joe, the ironic thing about this Texas football team is that they've been billed as a second-half team in the games, but really in Steve Sarkisian's tenure, it hasn't been a second-half program, and that will have to change this year in order for those expectations to change from the Texas faithful. Always love your analysis, Joe. When we return, Tyler Moss will break down the Big 12 and take his crack at predicting the college football playoff. Stay with us. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back into College Press Box. Here to wrap things up with his Big 12 breakdown and playoff predictions is Tyler Moss. How's it going, Tyler?
I'm doing good. Campbell, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Always happy to be here, and we're going to go ahead and start small and work our way up. We're going to look at the rest of Texas's schedule, then what the Big 12 looks like before moving into playoff talks, right? And first of all, the Big 12 is weird this year, like dizzyingly weird. Looking at who's won what matchups and who still has to play who and all of this, it left me more confused than anything. Because who would have thought that West Virginia would be at the top of the conference until Houston would get the latter of 2 miracles in that game to knock them off? And who could have seen Oklahoma State losing to South Alabama, then going to beat Kansas State and Kansas State in back-to-back weeks? And of course, the big question, what will this conference look like next year when its only ranked teams leave? Now, all I can really answer is what Texas needs to do the remainder of the season, because it's a simple answer, not lose. If they want to contend for the Big 12 championship come December, they need to win out, and that shouldn't really be an issue for them. From this point forward, we will be almost exclusively speculating. I just want to put that out there. This is my speculations, so bear in mind, right? We'll run through the remainder of Texas's schedule, looking at some of the closer contests first. And I think the one that circled the most is TCU later in the season. This is a TCU team that isn't the same team we saw a year ago, but they're pretty good regardless. Even with starting quarterback Chandler Morris out for the foreseeable future, the Horned Frogs are still going to be a dangerous team late in November. I think the key to winning this game is going to be shutting down the run. TCU averages nearly 200 yards rushing a game, and taking that away will put the pressure on Morris if he plays, or their freshman quarterback, Josh Hoover. Secondly, Ames, Iowa, on this list. I mean, are you kidding me? The Cyclones are 3-1 in conference play with wins over Oklahoma State, the aforementioned TCU, and Cincinnati. Texas will head to Ames after being in Fort Worth, so don't be surprised if Iowa State gives UT a run for their money on their road trip. The Cyclones' offense hasn't been super explosive, but their defense has been stifling to opposing teams. Texas will need its offense to be operating on all cylinders to overcome this defense, and then they'll be absolutely fine. I'm looking for Quinn Ewers to get a lot of yardage in this game, get Jonathan Brooks going, and then we'll get there. Now, for your Tyler Moss fact of the day. Only one of Texas's teams on the remaining schedule has an all-time winning record against the Horns. Only one of the teams on Texas' remaining schedule has the Horns lost to both of them in the last two matchups. There is only one team on Texas' schedule that a much younger me was in attendance the last time they played this team. That is right, as the BYU Cougars. They're coming to Austin on the last weekend of October, and they are a weird matchup. The Cougars were just a handful of plays away from beating Kansas and going into Fort Worth undefeated, and instead, they went into Fort Worth with one loss and got absolutely manhandled by the Horned Frogs. The key here, though, is defensive takeaways. The main reason BYU lost to both Kansas and TCU was ball security, so if the Horns take the ball away, they shouldn't have any problems. Next, I'm going to go ahead and look at Kansas State. Texas has had Kansas State's number for the past little while. They've won the last 6 matchups, even winning last year in Manhattan against the future Big 12 champs. They've been explosive so far this season. They've averaged nearly 40 points a game, and the Texas front seven is going to need to be on their game and put pressure on Will Howard and the Wildcats offense. And then we won't spend much time on there. There's 2 more matchups I haven't talked about yet. I don't think Houston will be much of an issue for Texas. Pound for pound, I think Texas should win that matchup all day. And Texas Tech is the last game of the season on Black Friday, and it should be the last thing on Texas' mind. We know everything was supposed to run through Lubbock this season, and most things have with ease, right? So now, the Big 12 championship, it basically comes down to this, a Texas and OU rematch. I said it before, the Big 12 is weird, but I would be absolutely shocked if it's anybody but these teams. I'm not going to go way deep into that game that we saw already, but when they faced off earlier in the season, there's only one thing that really set them apart, and it was turnovers. Texas had 3, and Quinn was responsible for all 3 of those, and a turnover on downs, including that start of the game where Quinn threw a pick, left the OU set up in the red zone. But they had a solid showing besides that. I think that if or when the 2 meet up in Arlington, Texas will be better prepared to shut down Dylan Gabriel. Regardless of that outcome, it will be a good game for anyone not named Brett Yormark, right? I mean, obviously. And now we come to the larger-than-life question. What are the playoff chances? Let's go ahead and assume that Texas is going to be 12-1 in the Big 12 champ. Is that enough to make the playoffs? In my mind, no, not without some assistance, right? At the moment, here are all 7 teams ranked ahead of Texas. You have Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Washington, Oklahoma, and Penn State. We can assume that Georgia will retain the number 1 spot, most likely as the undefeated SEC champs. You know, maybe Alabama gives them some trouble, but most likely not, right? The 3 Big 10 teams are all still set to face each other, so they may take each other out of the equation. Best case scenario for Texas, they all trade losses, and the leader of the Big 10 East manages to lose the conference championship game. Not going to happen. For the sake of realism, I'm going to go ahead and keep Michigan undefeated at number 2, and we'll drop Ohio State from a playoff spot and Penn State from contention. Florida State has been narrowly holding on to a top 4 spot, so if they drop a game, I think they're going to fall drastically. I'm kind of looking at Duke maybe this weekend, or maybe North Carolina in the ACC championship, right? We know that the committee doesn't really like punishing teams whose only loss is in the conference championship, but Florida State has some ugly games on their resume, so I wouldn't be surprised if even that is enough to knock them from contention, but I don't really see it happening. For now, we're going to keep them in that 3rd playoff spot. And that leaves us with 3 teams left fighting for that spot. You have Oklahoma and Texas, who may face off in Arlington, and I think the winner of that is going to be the Big 12 candidate for the playoffs. Like I said, the committee doesn't like punishing a team for only losing the conference championship, so I think Texas will either need to throttle an undefeated Oklahoma or convincingly beat a 1-loss Oklahoma. I don't see Oklahoma losing before then, but there is only one team on OU's remaining schedule that has an all-time winning record against the Sooners. There is only one team on OU's schedule that the Sooners lost both of the last 2 matchups. There is only one team on OU's remaining schedule that a much younger me was in attendance the last time they played. You guessed it, it's BYU. If there's an oddball game for OU to drop, It's going to be a cold, wintry game in Provo, Utah, on November 18th. Extremely doubtful. Jokes aside, it's not going to happen. Either way, let's just say Texas is the prime Big 12 candidate. But Washington stands in their way. The Pac-12 frontrunner is, in my opinion, the biggest roadblock to Texas' playoff hopes. They just eked out a victory against Oregon, and they are playing extremely well at the moment. But although they are Texas's biggest roadblock, their biggest roadblock is their remaining schedule. The Pac-12's last year is one to remember, as it's many points in the season they've had the most teams ranked, and Washington still has 3 ranked teams on their schedule, traveling to USC and Oregon State, and then facing Utah at home. They could realistically lose any of those games, and then again to whoever they lose in the conference championship. We've seen Utah play spoiler in the Pac-12 the past couple years, and if Cam Rising is healthy by the time they play them, I wouldn't be surprised to see them play spoiler again. So there you have it, Texas' path to the college football playoffs. To recap in the simplest of terms, you have to win, beat Oklahoma, and hope Washington loses. So with that all said and put aside, how do you feel about it, Campbell? What do you think?
I mean, I'm very excited for this BYU-Oklahoma game now. Maybe,
That's
just
right.
maybe, Oklahoma will take a loss.
The one on my schedule.
Yes. Thank you, Tyler. And when we come back on College Press Box, we'll wrap things up for y'all.
That'll wrap things up on today's special episode of College Press Box, Texas football chase for the championship. Huge shout out to every single person here today, both on and off camera. Putting together weekly shows here at TSTV Sports like this one takes an army. We've got a pretty strong one here. Don't forget to tune in to College Crossfire on Wednesday live at 9 p.m., hosted by my man Ryan Swankowski, as well as 1-0 Sports Show on Friday at 10 a.m. That's it for me. I'm Jason Kinander. She's Campbell Choate. God bless and have a great night.